Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Laik Siddiqui, the father of Holophase. We begin with our woven summary. Just the certified achievements so far, no new magic. Up to this point in episode 14, we have kept the clean room oath. We start only from phi, spelled phi, meaning a circle-valued comparability. Phi from x to S1. We speak only inside licensed finite windows, with passports, coherence thresholds, and identifiability limits. We build local lifts, phi tilde, written fois. We guard cuts as bookkeeping. We excise illegal zones, and we certify a domain D. We build A equals D phi tilde, A equals D fois, then jets up to N max, then invariance collapse, then topology, defects, and integer charges. And we reject anything that depends on chart choice, cut placement, or window tricks. Now, part 34. Part 34 is where we face one of the most seductive smuggles in all of thinking. Because from the moment we are children, we are haunted by a feeling that seems too obvious to question. We live in 3 dimensions: left, right, forward, back, up, down. It feels like the most basic furniture of reality. It feels like the room we were born inside. And that is exactly why it is dangerous. Because episode 14 is not allowed to assume rooms. Episode 14 is a compiler. It does not begin with space as a container. It begins with comparisons, differences inside windows. It begins with phi as a circle value assigned to events, and only differences delta phi inside passports are speakable. So anytime we casually say three-dimensional space, we risk slipping a whole geometry package into the foundation as if it was free. So in this part, we do something that sounds simple, but is actually a deep surgical operation. We take the word dimension away from intuition and turn it into an audited readout. Here is the mandate of part 34, said in everyday language first. Dimension is not a room we live in. Dimension is a number we read off an instrument panel. It is a report about how many independent ways of changing our local jet structure can support inside the certified domain before the changes become redundant, dependent, or undefined. And here is the same mandate in our formal voice, but spoken for audio. Dimension is derived. It is not primitive. It is computed from jet rank structure and the stability of derivative relations in a licensed window. Any dimension statement without an explicit derivation path from a certified jet basis is illegal and revoked. Now let's make that land in the bones with a story. Imagine we walk into a dark warehouse. No windows, no labels, no map on the wall. We are not allowed to assume the warehouse has length, width, height. We are not allowed to assume it is three-dimensional. We have only a flashlight and a rule. We can do comparisons. We can shine the light, listen for echoes, take small steps, and record differences. In Holophase language, the warehouse is like X, the set of events. The flashlight readings are the only data. And phi is the primitive comparability that lets us say, this event differs from that event in a cyclic way, like a dial. Now ask, without assuming axes, without assuming meters, how do we ever justify a number like 3? We justify it the way a mechanic justifies, this car seats 5. Not because the universe declared it, because the structure supports it. If a car can consistently seat 5 adults with 5 seatbelts, 5 headrests, and each person can shift without forcing the others to shift, then 5 seats is a real readout of the car's structure. Dimension is like that. It is how many independent knobs we can turn locally and still get independent, stable, predictable changes in the data. Not how many directions we imagine. How many independent degrees of variation the jet can actually encode in a certified window before the compiler yells illegal, redundant, or undefined. So now we state the mission of part 34. Mission: compile dimension as an invariant readout from jets, never as a primitive room reality lives inside. Core: dimension is inferred from rank type structure and the stability of derivative relations on certified domains. Carry: dimension is a readout, not a room. Now let's do it carefully, but in human language. First, remember what a jet is in our story. A jet is like a local alphabet of change. If we stand at one point and we ask, if we move a tiny bit this way, does phi change? If we move a tiny bit that way, does phi change? The pattern of how phi changes in tiny steps is the jet. And we already promised, we only talk about jets up to nmax, our honesty ceiling. If the window can only support first-order derivatives reliably, then we do not pretend we know second order. We stop at nmax and we certify what we can. Now, dimension in part 34 comes from a very simple kind of question. How many independent tiny step directions exist locally such that the jet sees them as independent? If only one independent direction matters, the effective dimension readout is 1. If two independent directions matter, the readout is 2. If 3 matter, the readout is 3. And if the readout changes from place to place or scale to scale, that's not a scandal. That's information. It means the structure changes because of degeneracy, defects, aliasing, or domain transitions. Now we install the gates. These are the compiler gates that make sure we never smuggle dimension as a primitive. Gate 1, the derived only gate. In plain speech, we check whether we cheated. Did we assume a background coordinate grid with a certain number of axes? Did we assume a space that already has dimension? Did we assume a metric, like distances and angles, that only makes sense after dimension? If yes, the gate fails. The claim is illegal, revoked at the door. We are not allowed to begin with in three-dimensional space. We are only allowed to end with the effective dimension readout derived from JetRank is 3 in these windows. So gate 1 is basically the bouncer. If dimension sneaks in as an input, it gets kicked out. Gate 2, the rank or readout gate. This is where we actually compute dimension from jets inside the certified domain. Here is the simplest analogy. Imagine a music equalizer, the panel with sliders. If the sound changes only when you move one slider, you have one effective knob. If you can move two sliders independently and the sound changes in two independent ways, you have two effective knobs. If three independent sliders matter, you have 3. Dimension is the number of independent sliders the local jet gives you. How do we detect independent sliders without smuggling geometry? We use independence in the information sense. Do the local derivative relations show that changing one direction produces a change that cannot be reproduced by combining the other changes? In formal voice, we extract the local first-order jet, which is represented by the carrier A equals d phi tilde. A equals d phi she, restricted to the window and domain. We analyze the rank of the derivative map implied by the certified comparisons. The rank is the count of independent directions of variation supported by the data. Spoken more gently, we look at the smallest set of local difference directions needed to explain all the tiny changes we can measure. That smallest count is the dimension readout. We repeat this across a neighborhood, not just one point, and we check stability. Because a single point can fool you, like a quiet second in a noisy song. If the readout is stable across the neighborhood, we provisionally accept it as the local effective dimension. Gate 3, the invariance gate, INV. Now we check. Is this dimension readout real, or did it depend on our representation choices? We change the lift. Fine becomes fine plus a constant. Spoken. We shift the 0 point on our phase dial. We allow coordinate relabelings of the internal parametrization. We do admissible redescriptions. And the count, the number of independent directions, must not change. Labels can change. The count cannot. If the count changes under admissible redescription, we did not extract the public invariant. We extracted a private artifact. So gate 3 insists, dimension is not what your ruler says. It is what survives redescription. Gate 4, the domain gate, DOM. Dimension is defined only where our operators are defined. If we are near a defect boundary, or inside an alias zone, or crossing an excision color, then jets may fail, ranks may collapse, and the readout can jump. That does not mean the universe became magical. It means our certified domain changed, or our operator legality changed. So Gate 4 forces us to attach dimension claims to a domain map. Where is this readout valid? Where does it become undefined? Where does it shift? And is that shift a real structural transition or a certification error? So now, with these gates installed, let's make dimension feel obvious again, without cheating. We go back to the dark warehouse. We take tiny steps and record differences. Case 1. We can only move along one corridor. Every attempt to move sideways hits a wall immediately. The only meaningful variation is along one direction. The jet rank readout will be 1. Effective dimension, 1. Case 2. We are on a flat open floor. We can move forward, back, and left, right. Every movement is a combination of these two. Up-down movement does not exist for us on this floor. The jet rank readout will be 2. Effective dimension, 2. Case 3. We are in open space, with stairs, ladders, and vertical freedom. Now there is a third independent direction. The jet rank readout will be 3. Notice what we did. We did not assume the room's dimension. We inferred it from what variations are independently possible and measurable. That is the heart of part 34. Now we add a more powerful analogy that helps audio listeners: the crowd in a hallway test. Imagine we have a crowd of people and a building. If the crowd can only flow in one direction, it behaves one-dimensional. If the crowd can spread across a wide plaza, it behaves two-dimensional. If the crowd can also use multiple floors and staircases, it behaves three-dimensional. Dimension here is not the building's truth. It is a readout of how many independent movement patterns the system supports, locally and stably. Now we bring in the cross-scale analogies because your instruction is across scales. At the smallest scale, imagine a bead sliding on a wire. Even though the bead is inside a three-dimensional room, its motion is effectively one-dimensional. The readout is 1 because the allowed variations lie on a line. Dimension as readout. At the middle scale, imagine an ant walking on a sheet of paper. The world is effectively two-dimensional for the ant because all its stable variations are constrained to the sheet. Dimension as readout. At a larger scale, imagine a fish in water. The fish experiences 3 independent directions because water allows volume movement. Dimension as readout. Now the deep point. None of these required us to say what the universe really is. They required us to ask, What does the certified local structure support? That is why dimension is a readout, not a room, is not a poetic phrase. It is a firewall. Now we state the prediction of part 34. Prediction. Dimension shifts track degeneracy, ceiling changes, or domain typing transitions. False shifts disappear under corrected certification. Meaning, if our dimension readout changes, it should usually be for one of these reasons. 1. Degeneracy. The jet loses independent directions because the structure collapses locally, like a sheet pinching into a line or a line ending at a point. 2. Ceiling changes. Nmax changes. If our window cannot support higher order jets in one region, our ability to resolve dimension may degrade. The readout can become unstable. 3. Domain typing transitions. Crossing a defect boundary, exiting a certified domain, entering an alias zone. These are not physics, these are legality changes. The readout can change because the language becomes partially undefined. And then the prediction says, if the shift is fake, if it is caused by aliasing, poor sampling, or a bad passport, it will vanish when we correct the certification. Now let's make this prediction vivid with the best everyday example: photos and compression. Imagine we have a giant photo file. It lives in a computer folder with millions of pixels. The folder is high dimensional in a trivial sense, but the meaningful content may be low dimensional. If the photo is mostly a clear blue sky, there are not many independent variations. It compresses extremely well. Its effective dimension is low. If the photo is static noise, every pixel is independent. It does not compress. Its effective dimension is high. This is exactly what our N-gate is doing. It asks, how many independent parameters are needed to reproduce the local data within uncertainty? If the answer is small, dimension readout is small. If the answer is large, dimension readout is large. And it can vary across the image. The sky region, low dimension. The forest region with many edges and textures, higher dimension. So dimension is not a single universal number, it is a local report. Now we state the falsifier of part 34. Falsifier. A dimension claim that requires a primitive metric or connection to even be meaningful in Phi-0 language. Translated. If someone tells us dimension is 3 because we can measure distances with a ruler, that is illegal here. The ruler already assumes a metric, and the metric already assumes geometry, and geometry is not primitive in episode 14. Or if someone says dimension is the number of coordinates in the manifold, that is illegal, because the manifold is the smuggled container. In our compiler, a dimension claim must be grounded in jets and ranks inside certified windows. If we ever find that we cannot even define a dimension readout without smuggling in a metric, then the program fails at this point. That would mean dimension is primitive after all. So part 34 draws a hard line. Dimension is only allowed as an output of the jet machinery. Now we craft the audit artifact, the thing we write in the ledger. And we do it in a story form, but still audit tight. Audit artifact. Rank diagnostics plus readout derivation logs plus invariance checks under read description. Let's tell it as a parable that an average listener can follow. The Flatlander story, but tightened, simpler, and clean room correct. Imagine a being that lives with a flat camera eye. It sees only a moving picture, brightness patterns. It has never heard the phrase three-dimensional world. We give this being the holophase compiler. We do not hand it coordinates. We do not say X and Y. We give it only comparisons. This sensor is brighter than that sensor. This moment differs from that moment. A web of differences. Now, in a small window, passport licensed, the compiler builds jets. If the being looks at a plain white wall, there is no variation. The rank is 0. Effective dimension readout, 0. There is no local structure to support multiple directions. If it looks at a simple gradient, light to dark from left to right, variation is along one independent direction. Rank 1. Effective dimension, 1. If it looks at a patterned wallpaper with variation left, right, and up, down, rank 2. Effective dimension, 2. Now the profound step. When objects move and the being moves, the pattern changes in ways that can be explained more efficiently if the compiler introduces hidden parameters, like depth. Not as an assumed third dimension room, but as a derived latent dimension, because the jets show constraints that cannot be captured by only two independent parameters without breaking coherence or stability. So the compiler can output two different readouts. One readout, the sensory manifold behaves like dimension 2. Another readout, the best stable explanatory parameter space needs dimension 3. That is not mysticism. That is ordinary. It is what we do when we infer a 3D world from 2D images in everyday life. But now it is legalized. We treat it as a derived readout from jet structure. So our ledger would record window ID, passport, coherence, and max, jet extraction method, rank computation, stability across neighborhood, invariance under redescription, domain of validity, and the refusal certificate if any gate fails. Now we install the revocation clause, because in holophase, nothing is nice. Everything has a kill switch. Revocation clause. Any dimension statement without an explicit jet basis readout definition is illegal and removed. Meaning, if someone says we live in 3 dimensions without giving the derivation path from certified jets and rank stability, we erase it from the phi0 ledger. Not because it is wrong, but because it is not a certified statement inside this compiler layer. Now we end with the carry, the one sentence the listener can take into the day. Carry. Dimension is a readout, not a room, and we make it emotionally stick with one last analogy. Imagine you buy a new gadget and it has a screen with icons. One icon says battery 82%. Another says signal 3 bars. These numbers are not things. They are readouts of the system state derived from internal measurements. Dimension is like that. When we say dimension equals 3, we are not worshipping a holy number. We are reading the dashboard. The local structure supports 3 independent degrees of variation stably across our certified windows under admissible redescriptions. And because it is a readout, it can change. In some domains, it collapses. In some regimes, it becomes unstable. In some scales, it may read differently. And that is exactly why making it derived is more powerful than treating it as a room. A room cannot change. A readout can. And the universe is full of surprises. So we close part 34 with the official spoken mandate again. Dimension derivation audit is active. All dimension claims must be produced by jet extraction, rank analysis, stability checks, and invariance tests inside the certified domain. Primitive dimension talk is illegal in episode 14. Dimension is certified only as a derived structural token, a report on the number of independent directions of variation available to the local jet. And one last practical line for the listener. If you want to go deeper into the formal work behind this, beyond the everyday story, search holophase on Zenodo. The formal papers are archived there. Part 34 complete. The container dissolves, the dashboard remains. Dimension is not where reality lives. Dimension is what reality tells us after we earn the right to read it. Always, peace be upon you.